Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. Thanks for joining me. Impeachment's going on right now, and I'm probably less abreast of what's happening than the rest of you folks because I've been washing the dishes. But I know that Ken Langone, a billionaire who owns Home Depot, has said that he feels betrayed by the attempted overthrow of the United States government. Now, he's a religious conservative who supports Republicans and I imagine would donate millions of dollars to the Republican Party. Howdy, Mr. Ed. Hi, Jeff. So people are noting that this represents a considerable shift in American politics. And a fracture in the Republican Party is an important way to free the United States from minoritarian rule, meaning rule that is entrenched unaccountability and entrenched affirmative action in favor of white nationalist voters, arising as a consequence of the legacy of an inbuilt part of the Constitution, one of the least principled parts of the Constitution, namely that historic concession made to slave-owning landowners in the southern states who were reassured that northern abolitionist-leaning states would not tell the southern states what to do, would not preclude them from continuing to generate significant profits from industries that had their profit margins rest on the backs of the forced labor of enslaved people. Now, that's why the Electoral College system was devised to put a finger on the scale for states with relatively low populations of voting Americans, i.e. landowning white men in the United States. Instead, Black enslaved people were counted in population tallies, not at a one-to-one correspondence level, but 3 out of every 5 enslaved people were added to the tallies of populations in each state in order to swell the ranks of slave-owning states relative to non-slave-owning states where they didn't have a let's count every 3 out of 5 houseplants into our population tally. That's insensitive, but I'm just trying to draw attention to the fact that counting the bodies of enslaved people as additions to population tallies when they had no actual voting rights and no human rights that were codified into law whatsoever is equivalent to randomly assigning population status to something else that has no rights. And there's not that many sentient things that don't have any civil rights. All right, so which is worse for Trump? Losing the PGA tournament or being impeached? Well, being impeached is presumably a precursor to potentially being convicted in the Senate. And the breaking news about the Senate is that Republicans are apparently discussing beginning an impeachment trial for Trump in the Senate as soon as Friday. So it's being debated, it's not definite, but that is very exciting breaking news. And I think illustrates potentially the inside knowledge that some higher up Republicans may have as to the details of the riot and what potentially is likely to come out, or at least be made more explicit to the American people about Trump's role in instigating and celebrating the violent attempted overthrow of the United States government and the overthrow of the overrunning of the Capitol, in which a police officer was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher, and we have viewed for ourselves other police officers being beaten with flagpoles holding the American flag. Now, that must be very challenging to Republican viewers as well as to the rest of the United States, but to Republicans particularly because they endorsed Trump and he still has quite a high approval rating. One thing I'll note in some surveys, and we know this now from polling, that there is a weighting away from Republicans in polling because Trump supporters are less likely to answer the phone, presumably because they've become more anti-society under Trump's 4 years of propaganda delivered straight into their veins. So potentially less obliging in a constitutional sense. They're potentially less likely to be the type of people who answer the phone to random callers they don't know. But in a general sense, the Trump effect has probably exacerbated that tendency to be suspicious of strangers calling. They've been taught to fear the media. The media are the enemy of the state. They presumably also view polling people as, to a degree, part of that enemy of the state, deep state organization. So, Kath says she is orange. Why are you orange, Kath? Did you get overly spray tanned? Mr. Ed says we should boycott Home Depot anyway for being a mega donor to Republicans. Yes. And of course, it is of interest why Jim Jordan supports Trump so vigorously. In for an inch, in for a pound. I think that's a perversion of a British saying. In for an inch. Anyway, the idea is in for a penny, in for a pound. There we go. I think that's the original version. Pound is British currency. Penny is the same as Americans have pennies too, don't they? And a pound is the British equivalent of $1. So what crimes has Jim Jordan committed that would make him so all in with following a seditious president? One might imagine that his crimes bear a relationship to his role in covering up the sexual abuse of potentially hundreds of young men under his care when he was an assistant wrestling coach at a university. You think Jim is also implicated in the US Olympic gymnastics scandal? Well, that's interesting. I have not heard that. The House voting on the question to impeach is along party lines. Yes, but the interesting thing will be any breaks in party lines, because anybody who is brave enough to show a disunited front to the American people helps the public, particularly the conservative-leaning public, understand that there is something genuinely condemnable about Trump's actions in instigating a violent attempted coup and a violent overthrow of the United States government and exposing legislators to considerable risk of losing their lives, as well as desecrating the seat of American government, literally desecrating it with feces and urine, as well as violating security protocols and taking pictures of Nancy Pelosi's computer and potentially installing malware on the computers or the electronic equipment of legislators. We don't know. We are hoping that these things will be investigated, that IT staff at the Capitol will be wiping electronic equipment or replacing it very thoroughly, so that US security isn't further compromised than it already has been. So Bob says the debate starts soon and they're voting on impeachment around 4 p.m. I do know, asking you're Australian, no, impeachment does not guarantee that Trump cannot run for public office again, nor does conviction in the Senate. But once he's impeached and convicted, then apparently a second vote could be taken, and if a simple majority in both houses could result in Trump being disqualified from running for further office. So that would be nice. It would actually probably appeal to a lot of Republicans because the balance of probability has changed, that Trump will continue to be a draw card to the level that's required for electoral success for the Republican Party. So they might be worthwhile considering allowing or facilitating the Democrats to use a simple majority to disqualify him from running for office ever again, because then they're cauterizing that tumor on their political party, and whilst they'll be in a weakened position, they'll just try to build up from that, as opposed to allowing him to continue to be a force in the Republican Party, i.e. a sanctioned Republican-endorsed political force, which could metastasize for them even further. I mean, even further sounds ridiculous given that he's already incited a violent attempted overthrow of the government. But yes, Trump could continue to be even more of a liability for the Republican Party. He could organize primaries for their senators, etc. So it's in Mitch McConnell's interest, truly, to get rid of him now. Trump has shown himself to be so ambivalent about things like helping the Georgian senators succeed in their runoff elections. Journalists have reported that Trump was pleased that the Georgian senators lost their election in the January 5th runoff election that gave Democrats essentially a majority in the Senate and took the position of Senate Majority Leader from Mitch McConnell. And bear with me, it's an interesting psychological explanation that for Trump's narrative to have more potency with his supporters, Trump didn't want a data point of Republicans can win with the voting equipment that he had been busy undermining the reputation of. So Trump's narrative is that the Dominion software, the Dominion machines, preclude the ability of a Republican presidential candidate, i.e. himself, succeeding in the presidential election. He was cheated because voting is compromised in all of these swing states. Everywhere else, it's valid. The votes for Trump are all valid. But in the swing states, something happened. Something is wrong with the process, and voting was switched. There's some way Democrats can control the process and therefore award the election to Joe Biden, his rival. So to maintain that story as plausible to as many people as possible, to maximize the potency and power of his election theft story, Donald Trump could not bear to be contradicted by the outcome of a Senate runoff election in which Georgian Republicans won, but Donald Trump lost with the same election electronic voting machines. So he ostensibly campaigned for those two senators, and he keeps referring to them nicely now. So, oh, yep, Senator Kelly Loeffler and Senator David Perdue, they're great people. He's saying that. But before, his Twitter account was mostly devoted to himself. And I would imagine if people unpacked his speeches, there would be evidence overall that he did not exert himself on their behalf, because he was fundamentally hoping that the Democrats would win and therefore not challenge his narrative of Democrats have found a way to covertly overthrow Republican victories in that state. Does that make sense to you all? Bob is reading, they're reading the impeachment article now on the floor of the House. Sunshine says, do you think Trump knew about the plans to attack the Capitol? I think he was hoping that would happen. I think he tried to instigate it and orchestrate it. So insofar as I know what I'm going to eat for lunch when I make plans to do so, then yes, Trump knew in advance. I think Sunshine Account was talking about the level of Trump's involvement in the day-to-day details of the plot to overthrow the Capitol, whether or not he knew that maps were being circulated of the Capitol. So I don't know to what level Trump was involved in the planning of the riot, but I think at the same time his followers loved working on a sort of Q drop style approach of just trying to read into Trump's comments and enjoying the mystery of saying, okay, he's told us to be there and it'll be wild. He needs our help and he needs us to make it wild. He needs us to violently overthrow the government because of their refusal to award the election to Trump. The refusal of American institutions to throw out the votes of Black Americans. So there were lots of white supremacist, white nationalist groups who considered themselves as taking marching orders from Trump via his tweets, via the covert messaging of his tweets and other comments. So yes, I would say he's not involved in planning it at that level of telling them to buy zip ties, but I would imagine he's aware of how they would act and the paramilitary support paramilitary groups that supported him. Look, he'd already told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. I think it's fairly evident that he knew he was communicating to them that this was the moment, that he was saying, come to this protest, it will be wild, i.e., today is the day that I need you to come to the Capitol and try to break in and try to kill anybody I tell you I need killed. So in that case, it was Pence, because Trump wanted to punish him for the audacity of understanding that he had no constitutional powers to throw out the results of the Electoral College system. Bob can't watch the debate. And I think that's fair. I'm not watching it, but I'm grateful to people who do. Louis here. Hello, Louis. Nice to see you. The resolution is debatable for 2 hours. Yes, not a vote on impeachment soon. That's at 4 p.m., I believe it's scheduled for. And they're giving Jim Jordan a whole hour. Lordy. Mr. Ed thinks he planned it through black channels. Potentially, but difficult for Trump. And I imagine he knew the power he could still exert through open channels, and that would give him joy, knowing that he could tweet, and his long established communication procedures of winking and nudging white supremacist groups, that would work to instigate a plot that he presumed would work to his advantage. And of course, it hasn't particularly worked to his advantage. Let's quickly go through some of the disadvantages that have accrued to Trump as a consequence of this failed insurrection plot. New York City has cancelled its contracts with some of the Trump organizations, buildings and services, etc. The PGA tournaments have cancelled the 2022 golf tournament at a Trump resort. Republicans are inconvenienced by some large companies discontinuing any donations to Republicans who voted against certification of the Electoral College results, who voted against Joe Biden's very clear victory through not only the Electoral College system, which is a system that has meaning in the American political context, but also the popular vote, 8 million advantage Biden, which enhances the fact that the uprising was not an expression of popular sentiment. It was an expression of minoritarian rule that's felt itself to be thwarted. They're like, no, we liked having minoritarian rule over the United States. We liked Republicans being in control of the Senate, and so consequently holding up the whole legislative branch of government and having a Republican president in power who kept channeling billions of public funds towards agricultural subsidies that effectively functioned as distribution of government aid to white people selectively, because those funds were given predominantly to larger businesses and not to small farmers, meaning that money was concentrated in the hands of white recipients, white wealthy recipients. And that is the people that Trump tends to favor with his decisions, whilst still psychologically pandering to white people who are wealthy or non-wealthy. The white working class, but his voting base is predominantly affluent relative to their surroundings. This is a new thing that I've learned from reading an article in the Washington Post that said, time to break the myth of Trump's white working class dominance. he did increase his share significantly of white working class people, because Democrats used to have a stronger hold on that demographic because they were the party of unions, and working class people are people of all colors, but white working class people used to at least more significantly have ties to the Democratic Party, and Trump weakened some of that ties because of his inflammation of racism. Racism that's been festering particularly strongly since 9/11, but also festering as a consequence of the backlash, the response, particularly on Murdoch media platforms such as Fox News, the overly negative critical response to a Black Democratic president. Did I see that last clip from the Lincoln Project about Silent Pence? I did. Let's watch it. Good suggestion. And then I might go to bed. All right. Well, first, they've just released an ad 15 minutes ago called Follow the Money. So we'll watch that. And then I'll see if we can find the ad about Pence. Well, I note in the trending section it says Bitcoin, the Bitcoin dream is dead, which is good because Bitcoin is a currency system for criminals that facilitates crime predominantly.
If you're wondering how we came to this, you just have to follow the money. Millions of dollars of donations from America's biggest corporations and mega millionaires poured directly to the Trump campaign and those of his most ardent cronies in Congress, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and Kevin McCarthy. Corporations with names part of the American lexicon, like Charles Schwab and Johnson & Johnson. Families like the Ricketts, who own the Chicago Cubs, and the Perlmutters, who until recently helmed the Marvel Comics company. Mega donors like Linda McMahon from the World Wrestling Federation. Global private equity billionaire Steve Schwartzman and Jeff Palmer, the billionaire Beverly Hills real estate magnate. And many, many, many more. Each American only gets one vote, but when there are millions of dollars behind that vote buys access at the highest level. And with that level of access comes complicity. These mega donors funded a Trump campaign that supported a coup at the Capitol and attempted to dismantle our democracy, supporting those determined to take the vote away from millions of Black Americans. They are the mega enablers, and it's time to call them out by name and hold them accountable for their actions.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Now that's amazing. That's amazing. The Lincoln Project really are burning their bridges with Americans' wealthy Republican leaners, and that's great. Look, some of those Project Lincoln people have actively joined the Democratic Party now, and I, for one, thank them for their service. And I know it's very difficult for a lot of people because they were enablers of Republicans for their careers. But I still accept that human beings can be born into knowledge deserts and information deserts, and that culpability is a mixture of factors and consequences. Look, some of my friends on Twitter today, not you guys, but separately, they were getting upset about progressive advocacy for the woman who was executed today. Is it Linda Montgomery? Because she was a murderer who viciously attacked a 22-year-old woman, strangled her, and cut open her belly to extract her baby that she was 8 months pregnant with, and which is an extraordinary heinous crime. But people who were objecting to the Trump administration's execution of her pointed out that she had been extensively sexually abused and sold into sexual servitude by her family, and that she developed severe mental illness as a consequence and was delusional. So I'm not saying I want the woman to be released from jail or that I celebrate her life And I think she is culpable for the crimes she committed and that they are heinous. But I can see why the progressive left would have tried to awaken empathy for her amongst the population to say, please fight. Please raise your voice to ask the Trump administration not proceed with the first federal execution of a woman to have occurred in, I believe, decades. Jim Jordan has lost his mind. Yes. Well, he's been pretty obviously all in for treason for a little while, hasn't he? The degree to which they tried to misrepresent the Mueller report and the fact that Trump had obstructed justice, indicating that he was likely heavily beholden to a foreign adversarial leader, that was all part of putting America in danger and keeping in power a president who was not acting in the interests of the American people because he was beholden to someone who hates the American people, who wants to weaken the states, who wants to weaken the United States, not just in some abstract way, but to have harm occur to the American people. So yes, and effectively unleashed a president on the American people who would go on to a killing spree and purposefully sabotage America's COVID response, thus resulting in the death of close to 400,000 people now. And deaths are escalating. It was over 4,000 people today, significantly over 4,000. Was it 4,600 people? I should check. But it's a lot. I think over 4,600 deaths today. And he has helped inoculate America emotionally. Not all of America. Trump has inoculated his own followers, which are still substantial in number. So in November, there was 74 million of them. Now there may be fewer because the percentage of Republicans who supported the coup, the overthrow of the Capitol, initially there was 47% of Republicans who thought it was fine. That was when we had just seen the more frivolous footage of people who looked like they were tourists and petty thieves, which to me was, and to many people, was still evidently highly problematic and a problem. But it's become more evidently more serious in that we now know how much closer legislators were to death, to being taken hostage by the more organized paramilitary component of the rioters, the pro-Trump rioters, who came armed not with zip ties, but with zip tie related double handcuffs, double binding plastic handcuffs that are really difficult to escape from and that are typically used by law enforcement in mass arrest circumstances. And we know more about the chronology of the overthrow of the Capitol as well, and that legislators went within minutes or even seconds of being detected and then attacked by the pro-Trump insurrectionists, violent, in some cases armed insurrectionists. Do I worry that Trumpists will continue organizing over the coming years? That's an excellent question, Louis. I'm glad you asked it. Yes, but I think a lot of the steam will have gone out of them when he's no longer in office, pushing propaganda through Twitter close to 24 hours a day. The man didn't seem to sleep that much. I mean, as you grow older, I hear you need less sleep. So some of the steam will go out of it. When Hitler lost the war and committed suicide in his bunker, there were still Germans who supported him, who believed in the myth that he had survived and was in hiding, and that there were bases being built at the poles, at the Antarctic and Arctic poles, and that Hitler would emerge and that there were bases being built in those areas. And they had symbology of a winter sun associated with Hitler's Antarctic base being set up. So crazy people be cray. And that concerns me, first of all, about the inauguration. Like you, we've probably all seen the photos now of National Guard troops sleeping in the Capitol building. which apparently they're trained to do, be able to sleep on the floor using their backpacks as pillows, and to get rest under those circumstances, which most of us would find taxing, but we haven't gone through training to acclimatize ourselves to those circumstances. So hopefully they got some sleep. But yes, I'm concerned about Trump loyalists, sleeper cells of Trump loyalists who may be embedded in law-keeping military-associated agencies. And will Trump loyalists keep going? To a degree they will, but I think their power will be diminished significantly. They'll be seen more as weirdos, and there'll be more social opprobrium associated with a riot that is building in terms of public censure. So 47% of Republicans initially told pollsters that they supported the overrunning of the Capitol. That number has been reduced in polling now to 22%. And not everybody is glued to the news on the television. People move on with their lives, and some people aren't interested. But the longer these things continue to be discussed and unpacked, and the more the media continues to take this seriously and not pander to delusional Republican viewpoints or highly self-interested Republican viewpoints, that it's Antifa, that it's made up, that it's political games. The media accepts that it's not a political game, except for Fox News Media, which is still making ridiculous and offensive comparisons of Trump being kicked off social media platforms for inciting violence, with the treatment meted out to Jews by Nazis. So I've seen now comparisons of Trump being forced off Twitter to Kristallnacht, to Jews being put in a ghetto, all manner of really, really offensive analogies. But I understand what they're doing. It's an attempt to muddy the waters, that they know they have an audience of people who are likely to be very emotionally troubled right now, Republicans who have supported Trump up to the hilt, but who don't want to be associated with supporting the attacking of a police officer. So maybe they supported an attempted coup because they believed in their heart that the election was stolen and that Joe Biden is a secret communist plant or some version of that belief. But circumstances are illustrating in a way that's increasingly inescapable that the clear and present danger to the United States is not a made-up communist plant, but rather the current president of the United States who fomented an armed insurrection with his language choices and with his insistence on a fabricated reality that he won in a landslide, and that the results of the swing states, nowhere else, everyone else's results were valid, but the swing state results where Joe Biden won is indicative of a conspiracy to steal from him. And that very emotive language of theft and war and protecting your property was used to inflame Republicans enough so that many went to the Capitol, and many who couldn't take time off work stayed home but endorsed it. So 47% of Republicans were initially willing to tell pollsters that they supported what happened at the Capitol. The diminution of that number indicates that reality is hitting home to at least some of them. Bob turned off C-SPAN. Yes, I imagine it would be difficult to watch because of the Republican traitors. And that stuff would be more raw with Americans at the moment who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, I would imagine, from having live watched their seat of government be overrun by domestic terrorists. That's traumatic. For many people, apparently it's been commensurately stressful to the levels of stress experienced during and after 9/11. Random image, that's Craig, isn't it? Said he wanted to buy OAN. Now I don't think he can get the money to. True. I didn't think he could get the money to do that in the first place. I knew he had a lot of debts that were falling due after he had to leave the presidency. But even more so now that, yes, his businesses will be losing contracts right, left, and center. People who had memberships at his golf courses are apparently going to be increasingly unlikely to renew their memberships. I don't mean to sound surprised by that, but Trump has crossed a line now where some people will still defend him, but many other respectable people will no longer want to be associated with the businesses of the man who incited an attempted overthrow of the United States government, who incited an armed insurrectionist plot and participated in that plot at some level, whether it be by directing his appointees to the Pentagon to find some way to delay the National Guard, or whether people in the Capitol Police leadership positions understood that Trump's wishes were to keep preparations for the day at a low level. Because I've been reading that the preparations for that day were less than for other large events, which is extraordinary considering the amount of publicly available knowledge that there were going to be fanatics traveling to Washington, D.C. that day, intent on insisting that Trump had won the election. I wonder if Trumpists have through lines to the Tea Party of 8 years ago. Could you explain that a bit more, Louis? I'm not entirely sure what that means. Forgive my ignorance. Yes, Trump will need a lot of money for victims of the attempted coup suing him in court for their physical and psychological injuries. Imagine family members of injured police officers, or the family of Officer Seidnick. What's his first name? Is it Paul Seidnick? Of Officer Seidnick, who was murdered with a fire extinguisher. And actually now many of us have seen footage of that as well, of someone throwing a fire extinguisher into a small knot of police officers, killing Officer Seidnick. So we've seen that. Oh my gosh, we have an updated list of companies that are no longer donating to Republican members of the coup caucus. 3M, Amazon, American Airlines, American Express, Airbnb, AT&T, Best Buy, BlackRock, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Boston Scientific, BP, Charles Schwab, Citigroup, Cisco, Coca-Cola, ConocoPhillips, Comcast, Commerce Bank, Dell, Deloitte, Dow, Ernst & Young, Facebook, Ford, General Electric, Goldman Sachs, Google, Hilton, JP Morgan Chase, Kroger, Leidos, Marathon Petroleum, Marriott International, MasterCard, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Smithfield Foods, Target, UPS, Verizon, Visa, and Walmart. Now look at that. And that's not just the power of consumer boycott. They're not just doing that because they know that the American people predominantly don't favor coups. That's also, they need to retain their employees, their valuable, skilled employees. And employees have been making noises that they don't want to be involved with companies that donate to and support treasonous Republicans. So that's employee power, as well as and beyond consumer power. Consumer boycotts might not be the most effective things in the world, but something that they do is get the message out to employees as well. So that was a pretty big list of powerful and international companies that are withdrawing support from members of the Treason Caucus. What did the Lincoln Project call them? They called them the coup caucus. All right. The camera is an instrument that teaches people how to see without a camera. Ooh. So here are members of the National Guard posing for a photo with a Rosa Parks statue in Statuary Hall today. So that's respectable. Black members of the National Guard. And then here is a white supremacist posing for a photo with a statue of Gerald Ford, having put a Trump-Pence flag in his elbow and a red MAGA hat on his head. And actually, I remember that picture because I should have made this bigger, because that man, that photo was originally posted to social media by that man's father, who said, this is my son, so exciting. And then it's not verified because someone put up on social media a play in 3 acts. The father saying, this is my son, how exciting. And then, why the FBI contacting me, and then deleting his account. So somebody could have made that up using that photo as a base point, but that photo is definitely real. And so is this photo. So these are the people guarding American democracy now from threats of further violence. And of course, treasonous Republicans are trying to say that the Democratic move to impeach Trump is, in fact, an invitation to further violence, and trying to make the victims of the abuse responsible for the abuse. So in an analogy that would be very familiar, I imagine, to victims of domestic violence and victims of narcissistic abusers, they are attempting to blame Democrats for the harms that Republican-affiliated people, politicians and writers, have committed against American democracy, that America has been undermined on the world stage. America has been humiliated with its capital overrun. Its weaknesses have been put on display for American enemies to say, hey, just come in with a mob of people. Just talk to our most gullible people about how they need to go and live their dream by overrunning the capital, how there's some cause that we can lie to them about. They'll break through in massive numbers and put their lives on the line to attack police officers and try to kill them. They'll commit any number of felonies, and you can just slip in with them and then take whatever you like from American legislators. Take their computers, install malware into remaining electronic equipment. It was an open invitation to American enemies to exploit what they could see being broadcast around the world. To go back to your point, yes, not only does Trump face a lot of court cases, but also apparently owes close to $500 million. Oh, a preacher told you that he left the Republican Party. There's hope. Yes, I've been reading out loud some bits from Florida articles, such as publications such as the Sun Sentinel, saying that they had received an extraordinary number of defections from the Republican Party. Now, ordinarily, they have a few people swapping party affiliations every day, but at this time, Republican defections were outnumbering Democratic defections 7-1, i.e., this is related to the coup, and I'm personally not surprised. We've been holding out for those Republicans with the capacity to self-reflect, who don't have their identity so enmeshed with Trumpism that they're incapable of ever accepting that he did anything wrong. Because many people have completely subsumed their own conscience into Trumpism. And for everybody else to say, how is that possible? I presume you've known people in bad or destructive romantic relationships where they cannot see that someone is treating them badly. They cannot accept that the person that they love has flaws. And it almost seems as if they're making the mistake of projecting their own virtues onto the bad person. Like, I'm a nice person, therefore there's a nice person inside that narcissistic abuser, and I just need to unlock that good person by loving them more and loving them harder. And that love might have begun by a conviction that you're their savior, or a conviction that they understand you and they've seen value in you, and you have low self-esteem, so you cherish that they saw value in you, and that's helped you create a mirage of goodness around that person. Has Trump mentioned the Capitol police officer that was killed? I don't think he has. It's Brian Seidnick, isn't it? Under pressure, he was made to lower the flagpoles to half-mast, but he resisted doing so. It's the same thing as with the coronavirus. Trump decries mask wearing because it's a potent visual reminder that the pandemic virus exists. And if it exists, then why hasn't he done a better job of containing it? So he prefers that people go naked-faced and don't remind each other that COVID's happening and just talk about him and vote for him as a potential method of existing without the virus, in which there won't be inconvenience, there won't be lockdowns, nobody will have to do anything. Their businesses will survive because the pandemic isn't real, and they hopefully won't know anybody who dies. And if they do, well, maybe they would have died anyway. And all they have to do is sustain that belief that Trump is offering them that COVID is no big deal. And the same with Officer Brian Seidnick's death. If he didn't lower the flags, if he doesn't mention Officer Seidnick, then it didn't really happen. It's not in anybody's, in the forefront of their consciousness, and they won't be left wondering about Trump's role in causing that riot to happen and betraying Officer Seidnick, as well as the other Capitol officers and Metropolitan Police officers and everybody in law enforcement whose lives were put in danger that day at the hands of an unruly mob that was acting under Trump instructions. Random Image notes that on that list of companies who are no longer donating to Republicans involved in supporting the big lie of the stolen election, that they would have made a lot of money from Trump. I imagine yes. A Swedish Skellefteå scarf was found in the Capitol after storming. Tell me more about the significance of such a scarf. Are you suggesting that a Swedish person was involved in the storming of the Capitol? That could be true. An Olympic swimmer was involved in the storming of the Capitol. And Paul's listening but won't be able to respond for a while. Thanks for being here, Paul. Yes, Hitler would never visit concentration camps. Yes. Why would you? You set something in motion. You allow your most violent and sadistic people to carry out your wishes. Why dirty your own mind with exposure to the smell and the sights and the sounds of death and torture and suffering? Hitler could stay back, but continue to set in motion the events that were bringing him control at that point in time. His ability to characterize Jews as enemies had helped bring him to power. He had conducted a coup attempt in 1923, and then 10 years later, there he was. People placated him, conceded to him, and the Chancellor of Germany offered him a position in government. His party had only won 33% of the vote, but his supporters, the brown shirts, were causing violence and disruption in the street. So it was believed at that point that pacifying Hitler by offering him some power would be a good move. What was it a good move, ladies and gentlemen? Was it a good move to try to placate Hitler by offering him power, even though he only won 33% of the vote in that last German election? No. No, it was not. Hammerstrand has inside knowledge that only 17 of those particular scarves were given as an expat gift to former citizens of the city of Skellefteå. Skellefteå? So that's potentially going to be useful for the FBI, maybe. All right, let's see if we can watch one last Lincoln Project ad. But also look at this picture of these patriots for protecting our elected leaders and our democracy, and we hope they get more comfortable rest soon. So there they are. Look, somebody's using a step as a pillow. Backpacks, and there's their semi-automatic weaponry. I mean, and there's a bust of Abraham Lincoln without a beard. Looks beautiful. Looks like a beautiful statue, beautiful bust. And I am glad they're there, but it's scary to me now that the reality that there has been pro-Trump infiltration into various armed services is of significant concern. And I hope those people, if there are sleeper cells of violent seditionists in the National Guard and in the armed services, that they are reconsidering their devotion to Trump and that they don't do anything to hurt the president-elect and the vice president-elect. Because look, it's historic. Kamala Harris will be potentially the most powerful woman in the world. And it's norm-breaking to have a Black American woman so close to the seat of power to be vice president. And for women, it would be awesome to just be able to celebrate that and to rejoice in a woman ascending to such a powerful position, knowing that she and Joe Biden will be working closely together and that he trusts her judgment and that she has so much to offer to the American people. But instead, we are stressing about her safety at the inauguration and in the days leading up to the inauguration, because we know that there are ongoing threats and ongoing plans of further violent insurrection efforts from Trump loyalists whose reality has been cultivated to be sharply divergent from the reality that the rest of us know and accept to be true. And it's not a both sides question of, oh, well, we each have our own reality. The insurrection, the footage, the video footage is something that will break through to more Americans, more so than any amount of words and pages seem to do. That video footage of a police officer being struck with an American flag, a flagpole with an American flag attached. So Fox can continue trying to spin it as being some kind of new version of Nazism, that tech companies are cracking down on their websites being used as gathering points, internet cyber gathering points for insurrectionists to foment further violent plans. Fox News can continue to tell people, Fox hosts to be specific, Brian Kilmeade, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, can continue to lie and try to minimize the insurrection. But the attempted overthrow of the government, the violent death of a police officer, and the injuring, the significant injuries accrued by other officers, they can continue to minimize that, but the force and power of that imagery is circulating on social media. And some people will stay protected in their media bubble and will never encounter those videos. But there's a degree of porousness when a big event happens that can counteract the propaganda of Fox. So I think that's a problem for Rupert Murdoch and a problem for the Republican Party. And they can try and redeem this. Some of them will try and redeem themselves now, and I welcome their efforts to grind to a halt further insurgency efforts. But they're not redeemed in my eyes, or in the eyes of a significant majority of the public. But yes, bring as many people on board in a coalition of anti-fascists. We are all Antifa now, including Liz Cheney and whoever's joining her, even Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is temporarily on the team of anti-fascists if he's prepared to vote for Trump's impeachment. And I'm prepared to hand out a very temporary deputized sheriff badge to Mitch McConnell, just for long enough to evict the fascist from office as early as possible and to preclude him from ever holding office again, and to therefore stop him from terrorizing the American public for the next 4 years. Huey has several close friends who are retired Capitol Police. They say that the Capitol has never been so unprepared for a joint session. So yes, that all implies some degree of internal complicity at the leadership level of Capitol Police, because we know that legislators were asking the head of the Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, who's since resigned, are there preparations in place? And he kept telling them, yes, preparations have been made. And that he had asked some people in the National Guard in neighboring states to lean forward, but no. I would imagine that there's a degree of complicity amongst the Capitol Police leadership if it's so remarkable that there's a baseline level of preparedness. They needed additional, but they had less than normal. They had substandard level of preparedness. That's people hoping desperately that Trump will succeed in overthrowing the government and institute martial law and have a fascist regime set up for him that favors white people who vote for Trump, that favors white Christian nationalists. So some people support Trump out of a religious conviction, as compounded by idolatry of Trump as if he is the second coming of Jesus. So, yes, the sergeant at arms were the most responsible for the level of preparedness for maintaining adequate security levels. So I think, have the sergeant at arms of the House and Senate resigned as well? I think they have, and I've forgotten their names. But I would imagine that they have a degree of susceptibility to Trump and complicity in under-preparing the Capitol. All right, folks, how's the impeachment speeches going? Is anybody still watching? All right, let's play this one. Thank you,
We're
Lincoln.
gathered together in the heart of our nation's capital for one very, very basic and simple reason: to save our democracy. Make no mistake, this election was stolen.
Let's have trial by combat.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength. We love you. You're very special. What I said was totally appropriate. I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We will not let them silence your voices. We're not going to let it happen. We're gathered.
Good. I mean, I'm as tired of seeing and hearing Trump's voice as the rest of us, but we have to hear it for now. We have to help that message be amplified, that he spoke the words. He told them to show strength and not weakness. He told them to take their country back. He fed into that culture of entitlement that made them believe it was our capital, not in the sense that Americans believe that it's our capital. It represents us. It represents us through democratic processes that determine the will of the majority. They meant ours regardless of what the majority consents to. Ours because we are the only legitimate Americans. Ours because we are white Christians and we are tired of people telling us that we can't say Merry Christmas. How dare they? It's the world's biggest outrage. Just like you can see Republican Congress members today lather themselves into a rage over being asked to step through a metal detector after significant acts of violence and aggression against those working and operating inside the Capitol building. No, the true atrocity, according to them, is not the violent attempted overthrow of the Capitol and violent attempted overthrow of the entire federal government. No, the atrocity is that Republican Congress members have been asked to walk through a metal detector. And that capacity to convincingly lather themselves into a rage is what helps them be Republicans, because Republican political currency is confected outrage. Oh no, cancel culture. Oh no, let's make the far left seem like the mainstream left, which isn't true. Let's look at examples of the far left and claim that they represent all Democrats and that they represent Joe Biden, or that Joe Biden is just biding his time before he lets communists into the Oval Office. The outrage is confected to muddy the waters as we try and point out the real conspiracies that have been occurring between Trump and Russian elected officials and potentially Saudi Arabian government officials and Israeli elected officials such as Benjamin Netanyahu, people who have been seeking to benefit from Trump's transactional approach to life and politics. Louis is telling me to go to bed. Yes. Tom Cole from Oklahoma is a horrid disgrace. Thank you, you're right. I'll go get some sleep. Other complicit Republicans, Rodney Davis, Buddy Carter, Ken Buck, all complicit. We still haven't seen that Mike Pence ad, though. Yes, Trump is banned from Pinterest, which is interesting. So they're restricting and banning Trump from all of those platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Google, Spotify, Snapchat, Instagram, Shopify, Reddit, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, and Pinterest. And interestingly enough, Andy Biggs and Louis Gohmert are now trending. Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, and Mo Brooks are the people who've been named so far as helping Ali Alexander, nee Ali Akbar, to orchestrate the Stop the Steal rally that became evidently a violent, pre-planned, to a degree, attempted coup. Oh, and there's a telephone number to call to tell the Republican leader that you demand he and his Republican conference vote yes on the impeachment articles. Do you want to hear that number? It's 202-225-2915. And the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, has apparently said on record that the Senate will not formally begin acting on this article of impeachment until January the 19th. Tell him to bring the Senate back immediately. And there's a number for Mitch McConnell as well. So that was a post from 5 hours ago, which is a shame because I remember 5 hours ago I was telling my husband that Mitch McConnell was rumored to be on board with impeaching Trump. Whereas delaying it until the 19th of January, that's not useful. Well, it's not as useful as impeaching him earlier would be. Convicting him in the Senate earlier would be. Donald Trump will be the first president to lose the popular vote twice and to be impeached twice. So that is exciting. Ivanka Trump thinks she's going to ride this insurrection all the way to the White House and that she can run for the presidency. No, she can't. You might be conventionally attractive, Ivanka Trump, but too many people now will associate your surname with the surname of the man who instigated the violent death of an American police officer.
Apparently, Twitter has suspended real Donald Trump.
Really?
Finally.
What?
That's
Permanent deletion of the
case.
account? Holy crap.
Account suspended.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is history, right?
This is history right now.
We're living history here on Friday night, January the 8th, 2021 at 6:31 p.m. Eastern. Twitter permanently suspended President Donald Trump's account on Friday. And here's the tweet from Twitter Safety. After close review of recent tweets from the @RealDonaldTrump account and the context around them, we have permanently suspended the account due to the risk of further incitement of violence.
I was about to say, where were you when Twitter suspended
Trump? People remember where
Trump?
they were on 9/11.
I remember being
People
really
remember where they
happy.
were
Right. I'm
the
going to
first night that Donald
remember
Trump was elected.
this.
And now we'll all remember where we were the night that Donald Trump was banned from Twitter. Quite incredible.
Where was I?
Do you guys think it's too late?
Well, I'm going to call that it'll take, less than 48 hours for Donald Trump to set up an account on Parler, send the word out to all of his supporters, and Parler's about to see an enormous influx of subscribers, and he's going to start organizing over there.
Yes, but then Parler's down now. So that's groovy. That's a groovy development. That social media tech giants takes little bits of courage. It's all additive. And then people feel the social pressure of being seen to, and in actuality too as well, stand up to defend democracy, to stand up to defend the will of the people against the will of a small, violent band of seditionists. And when I say small, I mean relatively small. Maybe 20 million of Trump supporters endorse violence against the legitimately elected president-elect. Oh, I love this sentence. The underlying thrust of Josh Hawley's argument is fundamentally and intellectually dishonest. What a beautiful sentence. That's a sexy sentence. I'm tired enough to be getting a little bit thingy. Okay, but we have finally found the Mike Pence ad that I suggested I would play.
A triumphant leader has emerged to take the MAGA movement into the future. Mike Pence. Courage is in short supply in Washington these days. While the divisiveness in this country has reached violent and frightening proportions, Mike Pence has proven that sometimes doing nothing is the most courageous act of all. And no one has done nothing more than Mike Pence hasn't. Other Republicans abandoned the president, while yet more continue to support him. But Mike Pence, using his decades of experience, knew that the best thing to do was nothing at all. It may look to the untrained eye as though Mike Pence is complicit in everything that's happened, but the truth is he's never looked at Donald Trump. In fact, he's totally giving Trump the silent treatment. He's speaking less to President Trump than he would to a female subordinate at a lunch meeting. That's the kind of resilient inaction America is in dire need of during these uncertain times. Mike Pence for president. Exactly the leader we didn't realize we needed to not have.
That's such the right music for the overthrow of complicit, treasonous, criminal people. And I would describe Mike Pence's behavior in relation to the COVID pandemic as criminally negligent, as well as they're pointing out he's not just useless, he is complicit in everything that Trump has accomplished. I like that they had zoomed into Pence's face and zoomed out to show that his impassive, neutral features were in the context of visiting mass overcrowding at detention centers for migrants. And I've seen an article today highlighting that there have been mass outbreaks of COVID at detention centers, American detention centers for migrants, because wherever you have a failure of human empathy, their politicians are most able to get away with pushing forward on an increasingly cruel agenda to pander to their most intellectually and morally compromised supporters, people who have fallen so in love with the transgressive nature of Trump politics. That is to say, he defied expectations by winning the 2016 election, and that was a lot of fun for them, a lot of fun to have that juxtaposition of expectation, Hillary victory, reality, Trump victory. So it was a validation of their worldview that they weren't racist, they were just race realists, and it was clearly so addictive, and that may be often addictive to fascists, to succeed in spite of everybody's low expectations of them, which is why I never endorse people speculating that what we need to fear now is a better organized fascist than Trump, somebody who's more of a smooth talker than Trump. No. Fascists are often stupid, idiotic, drug-taking, undereducated people with rat cunning who capitalize on the fact that people underestimate them and their own followers enjoy thwarting those low expectations, that the stupid, idiotic, undereducated people keep winning against all expectations. They love it. It becomes addictive. So the fascist leaders have to keep feeding that sense of transgressive glee by giving them things that are against normal socialized sense of common decency, giving the transgressive addicted people something to go, you say Trump shouldn't be able to get away with that, but guess what? He is. Doesn't matter what he does. What matters is that they continue to be able to say, you didn't expect that, could you? You didn't think he could do that, but he can. You think that's too cruel to be possible? Well, let's not. It's perfectly acceptable for Trump. Nah. Transgressive politics. Has anybody else used that phrase? I'll patent it. I'll write an article about it, and people should read it. Timothy feels that the Lincoln Project might have been the tipping point for educated Republicans voting their conscience in privacy. I agree with you. I think they helped galvanize political engagement for Republicans who might otherwise have been removed from what was happening. But the Lincoln Project popularized an understanding that there was not a united front behind Trump. And that is what is so important with fascism, to show everybody that everybody who's decent is on board with Trump. It's a facade. It's not Republicans against Democrats. The Lincoln Project made it evident that it was decent people against Trump. And that breaks through people's capacity to delude themselves that there's nothing that different or unusual about Trump. Human psychology pays attention to outliers, people doing something other than expected. Republican strategists are expected to support Republican politicians. Republican voters are expected to continue to support a Republican president. But they introduced a transgressive note all of their own. They broke that perception of a united front behind Trump fascism. They said, no, it's not acceptable. It's morally repugnant. It's dangerous for America. They counteracted the transgressive glee of Trump politics with transgressive disunity all of their own. So I'm a bit in love with the word transgressive right now. And that means I know that it would have resonance with people if I wrote it down. I'm going to go to sleep. Maybe I can do some writing tomorrow. If you agree with me that I should, sure. If you just think my skill set is limited to periscoping in a moderately entertaining way, that's fine too. Do you know what? I really respect my audience. And I was reminded of that by some Australians today saying, because of all of the American drama right now, they've been watching American cable TV and they are very impressed with the quality of American news and analysis. I know Americans are often complaining that it's inadequate to support a democracy, that American journalism has often been too deferential towards people in power and seek to get access to people in power by introducing too much false equivalence and too much devotion to presenting, well, Republicans say this, Democrats say this. But it's still much better than what Australians get access to through their news media. So when I saw someone say, how much they respected the quality of analysis that Americans listen to, and then I remembered that I have Americans who bother to listen to me and who actively even subsidize the continuation of this broadcast, I suddenly felt extra elevated. So I'd just like to sign off by thanking you all so much for your continuing engagement and support, whether it be with your attention, your services as a moderator, or whether you're one of my Patreon supporters. I'm just letting you know once again that I am very grateful and honored. Yes, and right on cue, that's Molly pointing out my Patreon link. Thank you to those who already do so. You can do so for as little as $2 a month. And if you're comfortable in doing so and it would bring you joy, then please follow her lead. But I won't hold it against you if you don't, because I'm gratified by your very presence as a member of the audience. Thank you, Molly. And Paul, thank you so much for your enduring support as well. I really love and appreciate it. Bob says Trump's impeachment trial will be after the Dems take majority in the Senate. True, but they need a 2/3 majority, which they don't have in absolute Dem numbers, so they'll still require Republican support either way. Yeah, that is frustrating that Mitch McConnell won't agree to reconvene the US Senate before January the 19th. I hope public pressure grows on him and that he feels forced to change his mind and to reconvene the Senate before then. They can change the rules. When can they change the rules? Anyway, I'm off to bed. Thank you so much, everybody, and hope to talk to you again sooner rather than later. Take care of yourselves. Fingers crossed that American intelligence services and law enforcement agencies can prevent an occurrence of any further violence or bloodshed, and that people begin to comply at higher rates with mask wearing to prevent the spread of the even more contagious variant of COVID-19, and that people continue to be kind and take care of each other via mask wearing, social distancing, and avoidance of mass gatherings. Thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Paul. Club. Oh, when I highlight it, there we go. Bye, Molly, Alan, Paul, Jeff, Bob, Norma Jean, Huey. I'm going to show my husband. Thank you for sharing me with him. Thanks, Elizabeth. Goodness bless all of you. Bless you all and take care. Hope to see you soon. Happy Impeachment Day. Mwah. Love you too. Bob says, hey, Mr. Dav, I'll go tell him.